A millionaire marries a poor woman as a bet and is surprised when the crystal chandeliers sparkled above New York's elite as Lucas Marshall, the city's most ruthless billionaire, swirled his champagne with practiced indifference. At 35, he had everything except, perhaps, a challenge worthy of his attention. That's when Jack Anderson, his oldest friend, approached with a dangerous glint in his eye. "Let's make a bet, Lucas. Something you can't win with just money." "I always win, Jack. Always." "Marry someone who doesn't fit your usual trophy wife type. 6 months. $1 million. Lucas laughed, scanning the room filled with supermodels and socialites. And who might this person be? Jack smiled mysteriously. "Chloe Richards." Little did Lucas know, this bet would unravel his entire world and force him to confront the devastating consequences of his past actions. Some games, once started, cannot be won, only survived. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you find this content interesting, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to support the channel and never miss our upcoming exciting stories. Thank you all so much. Lucas Marshall's corner office on the 85th floor of Manhattan's most prestigious building told his story better than words ever could. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of the city he'd conquered, while the minimalist decor spoke of a man who valued power over comfort. At 35, he'd built his empire through a combination of brilliant strategy and ruthless execution, earning him the nickname the Terminator in business circles. The morning sun glinted off the awards lining his walls: Businessman of the Year, Most Innovative CEO, Financial Leader of the Decade. Each trophy marked another company acquired, another competitor crushed, another victory in his relentless pursuit of success. His personal assistant knew better than to interrupt his morning routine of reviewing market reports unless someone was literally dying, and even then, they'd better have a good reason. But beneath the polished exterior lay a darker truth. 10 years ago, Lucas had made a decision that would haunt him, though he didn't know it yet. When presented with the opportunity to acquire Richardson Industries, a mid-sized family company, he'd orchestrated its downfall with surgical precision. Stock manipulation, leaked false reports, strategic buyouts, all perfectly legal, all devastatingly effective. The company collapsed within months, its assets absorbed into Marshall Enterprises for pennies on the dollar. What Lucas didn't know, or perhaps didn't care to know, was that behind the corporate facade was a family. Thomas Richardson, the company's founder, had built it from nothing, pouring 30 years of his life into creating something meaningful. The day the company fell, Thomas Richardson went home, wrote a letter to his wife and daughter, and took his own life. Across town, in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, Chloe Richards, she'd changed her name after the tragedy, prepared for another day at the non-profit where she worked. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that masked years of pain. The apartment was small but immaculate, filled with photos of happier times: her father teaching her to ride a bike, family picnics, her college graduation. The last photo taken before everything fell apart. Her mother, Marie, lay in the bedroom, lost in the fog of depression that had consumed her since Thomas's death. The medical bills were mounting, and the insurance company's latest rejection letter lay crumpled in the trash. Chloe straightened her second-hand business suit, checked on her mother one last time, and headed to work, her mind already plotting the next moves in a game years in the making. Jack Anderson, Lucas's supposed best friend, had his own reasons for arranging the bet. As Thomas Richardson's nephew, he'd watched from the sidelines as Lucas destroyed his uncle's legacy. He'd spent years working his way into Lucas's inner circle, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The bet was just the beginning. Sarah Marshall, Lucas's younger sister, had been another casualty of his rise to power, though few knew the true story. Brilliant and sensitive, she'd worked at one of the companies Lucas had acquired. The stress of the hostile takeover, combined with her brother's role in it, had pushed her already fragile mental health past the breaking point. Her suicide note, which Lucas kept locked in his desk drawer, remained unopened. The contrast between Lucas and Chloe's worlds couldn't have been starker. While he dined at Michelin-starred restaurants and flew private jets, she counted every penny and took the subway. His penthouse occupied an entire floor of a luxury building. She shared her small apartment with her ailing mother. He moved through life with arrogant certainty. She carried the weight of carefully planned revenge. But they shared one thing: determination. Lucas had never lost a game he chose to play, and Chloe had spent years preparing for this moment. The photo of her father that she kept on her bedside table served as a daily reminder of her purpose. The supporting cast in their drama was equally complex. Maria Santos, Chloe's best friend and colleague at the non-profit, was the only one who knew the full extent of her plan. She worried that revenge would consume Chloe, destroying whatever peace she might find. Some fires burn everything, including the person who lit them, she'd warned. David Chen, Lucas's long-standing legal advisor, had watched his client's ruthless rise with growing concern. He'd seen the human cost of Lucas's decisions, the lives disrupted, the families broken. But his warnings about corporate responsibility had fallen on deaf ears. "The market is cruel," Lucas would say. "I just play by its rules." The stage was set for a collision of worlds that would shake both participants to their core. Lucas, in his arrogance, saw the bet as another game to win, another challenge to conquer. Chloe, in her calculated patience, recognized it as the opportunity she'd waited years to seize. Neither could have predicted how their carefully constructed plans would unravel, or how the lines between revenge and redemption would blur. The weight of past decisions, the power of unspoken truths, and the unexpected force of genuine connection would soon challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. As Chloe prepared for their first meeting, she touched the locket containing her father's picture. "Soon, Dad," she whispered. "Soon they'll all know what it feels like to lose everything." In his penthouse, Lucas loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch, Sarah's unopened letter casting a shadow over his evening routine. The city lights sparkled below, a kingdom he'd built on the ruins of others' dreams. The bet seemed like just another conquest, another story to tell over drinks at the club. But the wheels of fate, once set in motion, have their own momentum. The game they were about to play would change not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The price of redemption, they would both learn, is paid in currency far more precious than money. The private dining room at Le Cirque hummed with understated luxury as Lucas Marshall waited for his first meeting with Chloe Richards. He'd chosen the venue deliberately, a power move designed to establish dominance from the start. The maitre d' hovered nearby, nervous energy radiating as he waited to serve one of the restaurant's most valued customers. The door opened, and Lucas's well-practiced neutral expression faltered slightly. Chloe entered with quiet confidence, wearing a simple black dress that spoke of quality rather than luxury. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed, met his without hesitation. "Mr. Marshall," she said, taking her seat without waiting for his assistance. "Shall we discuss terms?" Lucas recovered quickly, letting a practiced smile spread across his face. "Direct. I appreciate that in business dealings," he gestured to the wine list. "Shall we order first?" "No, thank you," Chloe replied, her voice carrying a hint of steel beneath its professional polish. "I prefer to keep a clear head when negotiating contracts." The word contracts hung in the air between them. This was, after all, a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience with a 6-month expiration date and $1 million prize at stake. "Very well," Lucas said, closing the wine list. "Let's lay out the terms. 6 months of marriage, maintaining appropriate appearances for social and business functions. At the end of that time, assuming all conditions are met, Jack will transfer $1 million to the winner. Chloe's lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And what constitutes winning, Mr. Marshall? What are the precise conditions? Please call me Lucas. We are about to be married. After all, he leaned back, studying her. The conditions are simple. We maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage for 6 months. No public scandals, no embarrassing revelations. We attend events together, live together, present a united front to the world. And private arrangements, Chloe asked, her voice neutral. What are your expectations there? Lucas felt a flicker of admiration for her directness. Separate bedrooms, of course. I have no intention of making this more complicated than it needs to be. My penthouse has plenty of space. You'll have your own wing, complete privacy. I have conditions of my own, Chloe said, placing her folded hands on the table. I maintain my job at the non-profit. I continue my normal routines and relationships, and I retain complete financial independence, no joint accounts, no access to your money, and no interference in my personal finances. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Unusual requests for someone about to marry a billionaire. I'm not marrying a billionaire, Chloe corrected him smoothly. I'm entering into a 6-month business arrangement with clear terms and conditions. The fact that you're wealthy is irrelevant to our agreement. Another flicker of admiration, stronger this time. Most women he encountered were eager to access his wealth, to be seen on his arm at social events. Chloe's indifference to his money was intriguing. There's also the matter of my mother, Chloe continued, her voice softening slightly. She's ill and requires care. I need to be able to visit her regularly and maintain her current living arrangements. Lucas nodded, making a mental note to have his team investigate the mother situation. Of course, family obligations are understood, he paused, then added, speaking of family, the marriage needs to appear genuine to mine as well. My mother will expect regular family dinners. Agreed, Chloe said. But I have one final condition. She met his eyes directly. When this ends, and it will end in exactly 6 months, we go our separate ways cleanly. No lingering obligations, no continued contact, no attempts to maintain any kind of relationship. Lucas smiled. Worried you might fall for me? No, Mr. Marshall. I'm ensuring that when our contract expires, you won't have any reason to remain in my life. The steel was back in her voice, stronger than before. They spent the next hour hammering out details, public appearances, living arrangements, daily schedules. Lucas's legal team would draw up the necessary paperwork, including a detailed prenuptial agreement that would protect both parties' interests. As they prepared to leave, Lucas held out his hand. Welcome to the game, M.S. Richards. Chloe took his hand, her grip firm and professional. It's not a game to me, Mr. Marshall. Remember that. She left him standing in the private dining room, puzzling over the strange feeling that he'd missed something important. Outside, in the back of her taxi, Chloe finally allowed herself to tremble, just slightly. Phase 1 was complete. In her small apartment that evening, Chloe sat beside her mother's bed, holding her thin hand. It's starting, Mom, she whispered. Dad will finally get justice. Marie Richards stirred slightly, her eyes focusing for a rare moment of clarity. Be careful, sweetheart, she murmured. Revenge is a poison that affects both sides. Across town, Lucas stood at his penthouse window, looking out over the city. The meeting had left him unsettled, though he couldn't pinpoint why. He pulled out his phone to call Jack. Well, his friend asked, how did it go? She's not what I expected, Lucas admitted. Are you sure about this? But Jack's laugh carried through the phone. Having second thoughts? That's not like you, Lucas. Where's your famous confidence? Not second thoughts, Lucas corrected. Just, there's something about her. Something I can't quite figure out. That's what makes it interesting, right? Finally, a challenge worthy of the great Lucas Marshall. After hanging up, Lucas poured himself a drink and tried to shake off his unease. It was just another deal, another game to win. 6 months would pass quickly, and he'd add another victory to his perfect record. But as he prepared for bed, his eyes fell on Sarah's unopened letter, and for the first time in years he felt a flicker of doubt. Something about Chloe's eyes when she'd said it wasn't a game they'd reminded him of his sister's in those final months before she died. The wheels were in motion now, though. In 3 days they would be married in a private ceremony witnessed only by Jack and a few necessary parties. The society pages would speculate about the whirlwind romance, the unlikely pairing of the ruthless billionaire and the humble non-profit worker. None of them would guess the truth, that this marriage was built on a foundation of secrets, lies and carefully planned revenge. The game was about to begin, and both players had everything to lose. The turning point came exactly 1 month into their arrangement. Lucas was reviewing quarterly reports in his home office when he heard the sound of breaking glass from the living room. He found Chloe standing amid the shards of a shattered crystal vase, her hands trembling as she held a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. "You," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was you." Lucas approached cautiously, noting the dangerous glint in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Richardson Industries, she thrust the clipping toward him. "Thomas Richardson's company, the one you destroyed 10 years ago, the one that drove my father to suicide." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Lucas processed her words. Richardson Industries, one of his earliest major acquisitions, barely a footnote in his empire's history, but the name Richardson. "Richards." "You're his daughter," he breathed, understanding dawning with crushing force. Yes, Chloe's voice was ice. "I changed my name after he died, after you destroyed everything he spent his life building." Lucas sank into a nearby chair, memories flooding back. The hostile takeover had been particularly aggressive. He'd been young, eager to prove himself, and Richardson Industries had been vulnerable. He'd never considered the human cost, had never bothered to learn what happened to the family behind the company. "Chloe, Don't she cut him off. "Don't you dare try to apologize. Do you know what happened after you won your little corporate game? My father came home that night, hugged me, told me he loved me. Then he went to his study and put a bullet in his head." Her words hit him like physical blows. "I didn't know." Of course you didn't know the newspaper clipping crumpled in her fist. You never bothered to find out. You were too busy celebrating your victory, planning your next conquest, while my mother fell apart, while I dropped out of college to care for her, while we lost our home, our dignity, everything. You were probably popping champagne with your board members. Lucas felt sick. He'd done dozens of similar deals over the years, had ruined countless lives without a second thought, but having one of his victims standing before him, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. "The bet," he said slowly. "This whole marriage, it was about revenge." Chloe laughed, a harsh, broken sound, finally figuring it out. "Yes, Lucas, I wanted you to know what it feels like to be powerless, to have someone else control your fate. I wanted you to understand what you've done to so many families." But there was more to come. As Lucas struggled to process this revelation, his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. "Sir, I found that information about Sarah Marshall's suicide you requested." Chloe watched as the color drained from his face. "What is it?" "My sister," Lucas said, his voice hollow. She worked for one of the companies I acquired. The stress of the takeover. She was already struggling with depression." Now it was Chloe's turn to be shocked. "Your own sister?" "I never opened her letter," Lucas admitted, gesturing to his desk drawer. "I couldn't. I didn't want to know." With trembling hands, he retrieved the envelope. The paper was crisp, preserved in its decade-long exile. As he read Sarah's final words, His carefully constructed world continued to crumble. Dear Lucas, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I couldn't bear to watch as you destroyed another company, another family, just like you're destroying mine. The Lucas I knew, my kind big brother who used to protect me from bullies, who taught me to ride a bike, he's gone too, isn't he? Replaced by someone who only sees profit margins and market shares. But the company you're taking over? I've been working there for 2 years. They're good people, Lucas. They have families, dreams, lives you're about to shatter. And I can't be part of it anymore. I can't watch you become this person. I hope someday you remember who you used to be. Love always. Sarah. The letter fell from his nerveless fingers. Chloe picked it up, reading it with widening eyes. When she looked at him again, her expression had changed, not softened, exactly, but complicated by this new understanding. You didn't know, she said. It wasn't a question. I never opened it, Lucas repeated. I told myself it was her choice, that business is business. I buried myself in work, in making more deals, acquiring more companies. I never let myself think about the cost. They stood in silence, the broken vase forgotten at their feet. Two people bound by tragedy, one the perpetrator, one the victim, both scarred by the same ruthless pursuit of profit at any cost. What happens now? Lucas asked finally. Chloe looked at the letter in her hands, then at the newspaper clipping. Now, she said, you understand what you've done. To my family, to your own sister, to countless others. Understanding is the first step toward redemption if you're capable of it. And if I'm not? Then you'll lose everything, just like we did. She placed the letter carefully on his desk. But this time it won't be because of hostile takeovers or market manipulation. It'll be because you finally faced the truth about who you are and what you've done. As she turned to leave, Lucas called after her. Chloe, I'm sorry for your father. For everything. She paused in the doorway. Sorry isn't enough, Lucas. Not anymore. If you want redemption, you'll have to earn it. Left alone in his office, Lucas stared at Sarah's letter, at the newspaper clipping documenting Thomas Richardson's death. For the first time in his adult life, he felt the full weight of his actions, the true cost of his success. The game had changed. This wasn't about winning a bet anymore. It was about confronting the monster he'd become, about finding a way back to the person he used to be. The question was, after a decade of destroying lives, was redemption even possible? The days following their confrontation brought a subtle but profound shift in the dynamics of Lucas and Chloe's arranged marriage. The vast penthouse, once merely a stage for their elaborate deception, became charged with unspoken tensions and painful truths. Every shared space held the weight of their complicated history. Every silence echoed with accusations and regret. Lucas found himself watching Chloe with new eyes. Each morning, she would emerge from her wing of the penthouse precisely at 7 a.m., dressed impeccably for her work at the non-profit. She never varied her routine coffee black, no sugar, a small breakfast eaten while reading the morning news on her tablet, and out the door by 7:30. She moved through these motions with quiet dignity, never acknowledging his presence beyond the briefest of nods. But now he noticed things he'd overlooked before. The slight tremor in her hands when financial news about corporate takeovers scrolled across the TV screen. The way she unconsciously touched the locket around her neck, the one he now knew contained her father's picture whenever she was stressed. The careful way she managed her modest expenses, down to the last penny, despite living in a billionaire's home. Initial attempts at conversation were met with cold silence or sharp, cutting remarks. "Did you destroy any families today?" she asked one evening as he returned from work, her voice casual but eyes sharp as daggers. Or was it just a regular day of soul-crushing capitalism? Lucas found himself fumbling for responses, his usual confident demeanor cracking under the weight of confronting his past actions. His attempts at change began small, almost hesitant. he started declining hostile takeover opportunities that crossed his desk. But he initiated reviews of past acquisitions, looking for ways to rehabilitate struggling divisions rather than strip them for assets. David Chen, his legal advisor, noticed the change during their weekly meeting. 3 declined acquisitions in 2 weeks, he asked, eyebrows raised. "Are you feeling all right, Lucas?" "I'm considering a different approach," Lucas replied, staring out his office window. "There has to be a way to succeed without destroying everything in our path." "This wouldn't have anything to do with your new wife, would it?" David's tone was careful, probing. "The market's been buzzing about your sudden interest in corporate responsibility." Lucas turned, meeting his old friend's gaze. "What if it does? What if she's right about what we've been doing all these years?" Meanwhile, Chloe was fighting her own internal battles. Her carefully planned revenge was becoming complicated by unexpected observations. She watched Lucas working late into the night, poring over company files, making calls to business owners he'd once targeted for destruction. She saw him struggling with his newfound conscience, witnessed the genuine pain in his eyes when he read about another corporate takeover's human cost. One evening, she found him in his home office, surrounded by papers and looking utterly exhausted. A familiar name caught her eye on one of the documents: Richardson Industries. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. Lucas looked up, dark circles under his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights, trying to trace everyone affected by the takeover. All the employees, suppliers, connected businesses. "I want to make it right somehow." "You can't bring my father back," Chloe said, but the usual venom was missing from her voice. "No," he agreed quietly, "I can't. But maybe I can help the others. There were hundreds of people involved, families who lost everything. I need to find them." Chloe stood in the doorway, conflicted. This wasn't part of her plan. Lucas was supposed to remain the villain, the heartless corporate raider. His genuine attempts at redemption threatened to unravel her carefully constructed narrative of revenge. Their public appearances together became exercises in complex emotional choreography. At charity galas and business functions, they maintained the facade of a developing relationship, but now there was an undercurrent of real tension and unspoken understanding. When Lucas gave speeches about corporate responsibility and ethical business practices, Chloe could hear the newfound conviction in his voice, see the struggle as he tried to rebuild his image. The press noticed the change. Marshall Enterprises shifts focus to sustainable growth, read one headline. Billionaire's change of heart, Lucas Marshall's new approach to business, declared another. Each article sparked fresh debates in the business community, with some praising the evolution and others questioning his judgment. Jack, the architect of their arrangement, watched these developments with growing concern. This wasn't how his plan for revenge was supposed to unfold. During a private lunch with Chloe, he voiced his frustration. "He's supposed to suffer," Jack hissed, "not become a corporate saint. You're letting him off too easy." Chloe stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "People can change, Jack. Maybe." "Don't tell me you're falling for his act," Jack interrupted. "Remember what he did to your father." "To my uncle." "I remember every day," Chloe replied sharply. "But revenge isn't bringing Dad back, and watching Lucas destroy himself won't change the past." These conflicts played out against the backdrop of their daily lives. Small moments of unexpected connection began to emerge through the cracks in their carefully maintained walls. When Chloe mentioned her mother's worsening condition, Lucas arranged for the best specialists to visit her home, respecting Chloe's wish to maintain her independence while still offering help. When Lucas found himself unable to sleep, haunted by memories of Sarah, he would often find Chloe in the kitchen, making tea. Sometimes they would sit in silence, two wounded souls finding odd comfort in shared insomnia. Other times they would talk carefully at first, then with growing honesty about their past, their pain, their hopes for redemption. Their domestic staff noticed the changes first. Mrs. Reynolds, the longtime housekeeper, observed how Lucas stopped barking orders and started saying please and thank you. She watched him learn to make his own coffee, noticed the way he'd leave a fresh cup on the counter for Chloe before heading to work. Small gestures, but telling ones. Even more surprising were the changes in Chloe. Despite her continued coldness, Mrs. Reynolds caught her lingering over Lucas's discarded newspapers, reading articles about his company's new direction. Once she found Chloe standing in Lucas's office doorway late at night, watching him work with an expression that mixed confusion and something softer, less definable. The business community's reaction to Lucas's transformation was mixed. Old allies began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with his new emphasis on ethical business practices. Competitors swooped in, hoping to capitalize on what they saw as weakness. But others, particularly younger entrepreneurs, began seeking his advice on building sustainable, responsible companies. Maria Santos, Chloe's friend from the non-profit, noticed changes in her as well. "You're different," she said during their weekly lunch. "Less angry, more thoughtful." "He's not who I thought he was," Chloe admitted reluctantly. "Or maybe he is, but he's trying to be someone else, someone better. And that complicates your revenge." Chloe stared into her salad. "It complicates everything." The most significant changes happened in quiet moments, away from public scrutiny. Like the night Lucas found a photo album in Chloe's room while looking for some documents she'd requested. It was open to a picture of her father at her high school graduation, his proud smile eerily similar to the one Lucas remembered seeing on Sarah's face at her own graduation. "That was 3 months before he died," Chloe said from the doorway, making him jump. Instead of anger at his intrusion, her voice held a strange mix of sadness and nostalgia. "He worked so hard to give me opportunities he never had." "Tell me about him," Lucas said softly, and for the first time Chloe did. They stayed up late that night, Chloe sharing stories about Thomas Richardson's dedication to his employees, his belief in building something meaningful rather than just profitable. Lucas listened, really listened, and shared his own stories about Sarah, her kindness, her sensitivity, her struggle with depression that he'd been too busy to notice until it was too late. Their public appearances began to feel less staged. At a charity gala, Lucas surprised everyone by announcing a new initiative to support small businesses affected by corporate takeovers. When he asked Chloe to help run it, her shocked expression was genuine. "Why me?" she asked later that night. "Because you understand both sides now," he replied. "The corporate world and the human cost. Plus," he added with a hint of his old smirk, "you're the only person I know who won't let me take the easy way out." The press loved the story, the ruthless billionaire reformed by love, the unlikely romance that changed corporate America. They didn't know the truth, the pain and guilt and gradual, reluctant understanding that was reshaping both Lucas and Chloe's worldviews. Jack watched these developments with growing alarm. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was turning into something dangerously close to redemption. During a tense meeting with Chloe, he reminded her of their original plan. "He deserves to suffer," Jack insisted, "to lose everything, like we did." But Chloe was starting to question whether more suffering would heal anything. She saw how Lucas tortured himself over past actions, watched him work tirelessly to make amends. The man she'd married for revenge was becoming someone else, someone who might actually deserve forgiveness. The real test came when Lucas discovered one of his former executives was planning a hostile takeover of a family-owned business, using the same tactics he'd once employed. Without hesitation, he stepped in to stop it, using his influence and resources to protect the smaller company. When he told Chloe about it that evening, she studied him thoughtfully. "You could have made millions from that deal." "Some things are worth more than money," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm starting to understand that now." The changes weren't just professional. Lucas began spending time with Chloe's mother, sitting with her during her lucid moments, listening to stories about Thomas. He funded research into her condition, but always anonymously, respecting Chloe's wishes for independence. Chloe, in turn, found herself drawn into Lucas's world of business and finance, but with a new perspective. She challenged his ideas, pushed him to consider the human impact of every decision. Their discussions over dinner became lively debates about corporate responsibility and ethical capitalism. The staff noticed they no longer ate at opposite ends of the long dining table. Their conversations lasted longer, their silences grew more comfortable. Sometimes they even laughed together, a sound that would have seemed impossible months ago. As the 6-month mark of their arrangement approached, both Lucas and Chloe found themselves facing an uncomfortable truth. The lines between revenge and redemption, between hatred and understanding, had begun to blur. The game they'd started was becoming something neither of them had expected, something real, something that might actually heal the wounds of the past, rather than deepen them. But with 3 months left in their contract, neither was ready to admit how much things had changed. The weight of their history, the complexity of their present, and the uncertainty of their future hung between them like an unspoken question. The revenge plot had evolved into something far more complicated, a story of two people learning that sometimes the path to healing requires letting go of the very thing you thought you needed most. The first climax of their story arrived with the sudden, devastating news about Chloe's mother. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the call came Marie Richards had suffered a severe stroke. Lucas found Chloe in the hospital corridor, her usual composed facade crumbling as she stared through the ICU window at her mother's still form. The doctors say her voice broke, and for the first time since their marriage began, she looked utterly lost. They say there's nothing more they can do. Without thinking, Lucas stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. More surprising than his gesture was the fact that she didn't pull away. Instead, she collapsed against him, years of carefully maintained strength finally giving way to raw grief. "She was all I had left," Chloe whispered into his shirt. "After Dad. She was everything." Lucas held her tighter, his own guilt threatening to overwhelm him. How many families had he destroyed? How many people had he left feeling this same devastating loss? The next 48 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors and whispered consultations. Lucas watched as Chloe handled everything with quiet dignity, the medical decisions, the preparations, the final goodbyes. But it was in the small hours of the morning, when she thought no one was watching, that he saw her true pain. He found her in Marie's room at 3 a.m., clutching her mother's hand and whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I got lost in trying to make them pay. I forgot what you always said about forgiveness." Lucas stepped back quietly, but not before hearing Marie's faint response, "Love heals more than revenge, sweetheart." Those would be Marie Richards' last words. She slipped away peacefully the next morning, with Chloe by her side. As the machines went silent, Lucas stood in the doorway, witnessing the end of another life touched by his past actions. Back at the penthouse, after the funeral arrangements were made, Lucas finally gathered the courage to speak. "This is my fault too," he said quietly. "If I hadn't destroyed your father's company, if I hadn't set all this in motion." Chloe turned to him, her eyes red but clear. "No," she said firmly. "Mom's illness started before everything. Dad's death accelerated it, yes," but she took a shuddering breath. "I've spent years blaming you for everything, Lucas. It was easier than facing the complexity of real life, real loss." "I deserve the blame," Lucas insisted. "For your father, for Sarah, for countless others. I've been thinking about something Sarah wrote in her letter about remembering who I used to be." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "The truth is, I don't know if that person exists anymore. I've spent so long being the corporate raider, the ruthless businessman, I'm not sure I know how to be anything else." Chloe studied him for a long moment. "Tell me about him," she said finally. "The person you used to be." Lucas sank into a chair, memories he'd long suppressed flooding back. I wanted to build things, he said softly. Not just acquire them, but create something meaningful. Sarah and I used to talk about starting a company together, something that would help people, make a real difference. He laughed bitterly. Somewhere along the way, making money became more important than making a difference. When did it change? Gradually. Each deal got bigger, each victory more addictive. The power of being able to make or break companies. It was intoxicating. He met her gaze directly. But looking back now, I think I was running. Every company I destroyed, every family I ruined, it was a way of proving I was strong, untouchable. If I could cause pain without feeling it, maybe I was winning. And now? Now Lucas stood, walking to the window. Now I feel everything. Every company I've destroyed, every life I've ruined, it's like carrying the weight of thousands of your father's deaths, thousands of Sarah's. Sometimes I can hardly breathe under the weight of it all. Chloe joined him at the window, their reflections ghostly in the darkened glass. Mum used to say that feeling the pain is the first step toward healing it. How do you heal this much pain? Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper. How do you make amends for a decade of destruction? Maybe you start with one person, one family at a time, Chloe suggested. Maybe you take all that business acumen and use it to build things up instead of tearing them down. They stood in silence for a long moment, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. Finally, Lucas spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. I have something to show you, he said, walking to his office. He returned with a thick folder. I've been working on this since I read Sarah's letter. It's a complete audit of every company I've acquired, every family affected. Names, addresses, current situations. He handed her the folder with trembling hands. I want to make it right, Chloe. All of it. I just don't know how. Chloe opened the folder, her eyes widening at the detailed documentation. Pages and pages of lives affected, families displaced, dreams destroyed. But also, in Lucas's careful notations, ideas for restitution, plans for rebuilding, possibilities for redemption. This is she trailed off, overwhelmed by the scope of both the damage and the potential healing. It's not enough, Lucas said. It can never be enough. But it's a start. In that moment, something shifted between them, something fundamental and irreversible. The lines between victim and perpetrator, between revenge and redemption, blurred even further. They were no longer simply players in a game of revenge, but two people standing on the edge of transformation, facing the possibility of healing not just their own wounds, but those of countless others. Marie's last words echoed in Chloe's mind, love heals more than revenge. Looking at Lucas now, seeing his genuine struggle with the weight of his past actions, she wondered if her mother had understood something she was only now beginning to grasp. The question was, could love truly heal wounds this deep? And were they brave enough to find out? The revelation about Chloe's lost pregnancy came on a rain-soaked Sunday morning at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Lucas had noticed her slipping out early, following her quietly out of concern. He found her sitting alone in the vast, empty church, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her mother's rosary. Thunder rumbled outside as he slid into the pew beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. For several minutes, only the sound of rain against stained glass windows filled the sacred space. I was pregnant, Chloe finally whispered, her voice echoing softly in the cathedral's vastness. When your takeover destroyed Dad's company. I was 2 months along. Lucas felt his heart stop. The weight of this new revelation threatened to crush him entirely. Michael and I had just gotten engaged, she continued, running the rosary beads through her fingers. He worked for Dad's company too. We had so many plans, so many dreams, she paused, looking up at the crucifix hanging above the altar. God had other plans, it seems. What happened? Lucas asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The stress. The grief. The constant worry about money and Mom's care. After Dad, she closed her eyes, pain etching deep lines around her mouth. I lost the baby 3 days after Dad's funeral. Michael couldn't handle it all, the loss of his job, our baby, watching me fall apart. He left a month later. Lucas sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of destruction he'd caused expanding exponentially. Not just companies and jobs, not just Thomas Richardson's life, but an unborn child, an entire future erased before it could begin. "I come here every Sunday," Chloe said softly, gesturing to the quiet grandeur around them. "Mom always said God's presence helps heal the deepest wounds. I've been trying to find forgiveness not just for you, but for myself, for letting revenge consume me for so long." "I don't deserve forgiveness," Lucas whispered, his own eyes drawn to the crucifix. He hadn't stepped foot in a church since Sarah's funeral. "Maybe that's not for us to decide," Chloe replied. "Mom believed that grace finds us even when we think we're unworthy of it." The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief and unspoken prayers. Outside, the rain continued to fall, nature's own tears for all that had been lost. "I never told anyone else," Chloe admitted. "Not even Jack. It was too painful, too personal. But Mom knew. She's the one who kept telling me that carrying this anger would only hurt me more." Lucas thought of Sarah, of her final letter. "My sister used to say something similar. She believed in redemption, in second chances. I used to think it was weakness." He laughed bitterly. "I was so wrong about so many things." A shaft of sunlight suddenly broke through the rain clouds, sending rainbow-colored light through the stained glass windows. It fell across their pew like a benediction, illuminating their shared pain and possibility of grace. "After I lost the baby," Chloe continued, "I stopped believing in everything: God, love, happiness. Revenge became my new religion. But sitting here Sunday after Sunday, something started to change. Mom would say it was God working in mysterious ways." She turned to face him fully for the first time. "Do you know what the hardest part is? Realizing that all this pain, Dad's death, my lost baby, your sister's suicide, it's all connected in this web of consequences we never could have predicted. No one is purely victim or purely villain." Lucas felt tears sliding down his own cheeks. "How do we move forward from here? How do we honor all that's been lost?" "Maybe we start by acknowledging that healing is possible," Chloe said softly. "That grace exists, even for those who think they don't deserve it." She hesitated, then reached out to take his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact between them. "Mom's last coherent words to me were about letting go of revenge, about choosing love instead. I didn't understand then, but I'm starting to." Lucas stared at their joined hands, feeling unworthy of this simple gesture of comfort. "I want to make it right," he whispered. "Not just for you and your family, but for everyone I've hurt. I just don't know how." "Perhaps that's where faith comes in," Chloe replied. "Not just in God, but in the possibility of redemption, of transformation." She squeezed his hand gently. "Mom would say that's what grace is, getting what we don't deserve and finding beauty in the broken places." They sat together in the cathedral until the rain stopped, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow connected in their shared grief and tentative hope. The morning light continued to stream through the stained glass, painting patterns of possibility across the ancient stone floor. As they finally stood to leave, Lucas paused, looking back at the crucifix. "Do you think," he asked hesitantly, "there's really hope for someone like me?" Chloe followed his gaze upward. "Mom always said that as long as we're breathing, there's hope for everyone. Maybe that's what faith is really about, believing in the possibility of redemption, even when it seems impossible." They walked out of the cathedral together, stepping into a world washed clean by rain and illuminated by breaking sunshine. The weight of their shared tragedy remained, but something else had begun to take root, a fragile hope that perhaps love really could heal more than revenge. Behind them, the cathedral bells began to toll, their deep resonance echoing across the city like a reminder that even in the darkest moments, grace continues to call us home. Back at the penthouse, they sat in contemplative silence on the balcony, The city spread before them like a canvas of endless possibilities. Lucas noticed Chloe still holding her mother's rosary, the beads catching the afternoon light. "Tell me about your baby," he said softly. "If you want to." Chloe took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the cross. It was a girl. I knew it somehow, even before the tests could tell. I had already started thinking of names. She smiled sadly. "Grace. I wanted to call her Grace." The name hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and loss. Lucas closed his eyes, imagining the life that might have been a little girl with Chloe's strength and determination, a family untouched by his actions. "Michael and I had started planning the nursery," Chloe continued, her voice distant with memory. "He painted it yellow, said it was like capturing sunshine. When everything fell apart, I couldn't go back to that apartment, couldn't face that empty yellow room." "And Michael? Did he ever try to?" "Contact me," Chloe shook her head. "He moved to California, married someone else, has 2 kids now. I saw it on social media last year." She paused, twisting the rosary. "Mom said sometimes God closes doors to open windows, but for a long time all I could see were the closed doors." Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And now?" "Now," Chloe considered the question. "Now I'm starting to understand what Mom meant about grace finding us in unexpected places. About how sometimes our greatest pain can lead to our greatest healing if we let it." She stood, walking to the balcony rail. "You know what's strange? When I planned this revenge, I thought making you suffer would somehow balance the scales. But sitting in that church today, I realized something: pain doesn't cancel pain, it just creates more." Lucas joined her at the railing, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was," Chloe agreed. "Even in her worst moments, she never lost her faith in God, in the possibility of healing. I used to think it was naive. Now I'm not so sure." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Below them, the city was coming alive with evening lights, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. "What do we do now?" Lucas asked, echoing his question from the church. "How do we honor all these losses, your father, Grace, Sarah, while still moving forward?" Chloe turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe we start by acknowledging that healing doesn't mean forgetting. That redemption doesn't erase the past, but gives it new meaning." She held out her mother's rosary. "Mom would want you to have this, as a reminder that grace finds us even in our darkest moments." Lucas stared at the offered beads, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I can't." "You can," Chloe said firmly, "because sometimes accepting grace is harder than earning it. That's what makes it grace." As he took the rosary, their fingers brushed, and in that moment something shifted between them, something profound and irreversible. They were no longer merely players in a game of revenge, but 2 souls connected by shared pain and the possibility of redemption. The city continued to pulse below them, a testament to life's endless capacity for renewal and transformation. And in the growing darkness they stood together, holding the weight of their past between them while facing the uncertainty of their future with newfound hope. The rosary beads caught the last rays of sunlight, throwing tiny rainbows across the balcony, a reminder that even in the midst of profound loss, beauty finds a way to shine through. The first surprise element came when Lucas discovered an old leather journal while sorting through his office archives. The notebook was worn, its pages yellowed with age, and on the cover was a single name: Thomas Richardson. His hands trembled as he opened it, recognizing the potential significance of this discovery. Inside, he found not just business records, but personal reflections spanning decades. As he read, a very different picture of Chloe's father emerged, one that shook Lucas to his core. "Met with young Lucas Marshall today," one entry read, dated 15 years earlier. "Brilliant boy, reminds me of myself at that age. His proposal for the tech startup needs work, but there's real potential there. decided to give him seed funding. Sometimes all a young dreamer needs is someone to believe in them. Lucas sank into his chair, memories flooding back. His first venture, long before he became the corporate raider everyone knew. Thomas Richardson had been his first investor, his first mentor. How had he forgotten? Further entries revealed more connections. Thomas had helped Sarah get her first job, had written letters of recommendation for her graduate school applications. He'd been more than just another business target, he'd been a part of their lives. When Chloe arrived home that evening, she found Lucas sitting in the dark, the journal open on his lap. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. As she read the entries, her own memories began to surface. "I remember him talking about you," she said slowly. "He was so proud when your first company succeeded. He used to say you reminded him of himself at that age." "I destroyed the man who gave me my start," Lucas whispered. "I became everything he warned me against." But there was more. Hidden in the back of the journal was an envelope, sealed and addressed to Lucas, dated just days before Thomas's death. With trembling fingers he opened it. "Dear Lucas, if you're reading this, things have gone very wrong. I've watched you change over the years, seen the bright young man I knew turn into something harder, colder. I blame myself in part. Perhaps I should have warned you more strongly about the seductive nature of power and wealth. I know you're coming for my company. I've seen the signs, recognized the tactics I once taught you. The irony doesn't escape me. But I'm writing not in anger, but in hope that someday you'll remember who you were before the money and power changed you. Take care of my daughter if you can. She has her mother's strength and my stubbornness, a dangerous combination. Don't let her be consumed by bitterness as you were by ambition. I forgive you, Lucas. I hope someday you can forgive yourself. Thomas." The letter fell from his numb fingers. Chloe picked it up, reading it through tears. He knew, she whispered. He knew what was coming, and still. "He forgave me," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "How could he forgive me?" They spent the night going through the journal together, discovering more connections between their families than either had known existed. Photos fell from between the pages, Lucas and Thomas at business conferences, Sarah at company picnics, a younger Chloe playing with Lucas's cousins at corporate events. "We weren't strangers," Chloe realized. "We were practically family." The discovery changed everything. Their shared history wasn't just one of destruction and revenge, it was also one of mentorship, kindness, and connections that ran deeper than either had imagined. In Thomas's final entries, he wrote about his fears for both Lucas and Chloe, worried that one would be destroyed by ambition and the other by bitterness. His last words were a prayer that they would both find their way back to who they were meant to be. The journal revealed other secrets too. Thomas had known about his daughter's pregnancy, had been planning to set up a trust fund for his grandchild. He'd also known about Sarah's struggles, had tried to reach out to her in those final months. He was trying to save everyone, Lucas said, staring at the final entries. While I was planning his destruction, he was still trying to save me from myself. The weight of Thomas's forgiveness, offered before it was even sought, transformed their understanding of both the past and their present situation. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred further, replaced by a more complex web of relationships, choices, and consequences. As dawn broke over the city, they sat surrounded by the physical evidence of their intertwined histories, photos, letters, journal entries that painted a picture so different from the simple narrative of revenge they'd both believed in. "What do we do with this?" Chloe asked, holding her father's final letter. Lucas looked at her, seeing for the first time not just his victim's daughter, but the child of his mentor, the woman his sister had known, the person his younger self might have been friends with under different circumstances. "We honor it," he said finally. "We honor his forgiveness by finding a way forward that doesn't destroy either of us." The journal lay between them, its pages open to Thomas's final prayer for both their futures, a bridge across the chasm of pain and revenge they'd built between them. The second climax erupted when Marshall Enterprises faced its biggest crisis in history. The news broke on a Monday morning. Several major investors, led by Jack, had orchestrated a hostile takeover attempt. The stock price plummeted as rumors spread about Lucas's weakness and his recent focus on ethical business practices. Lucas stood in his office, watching the financial news channels reporting on his company's apparent downfall. The empire he'd built was under attack, and ironically, the tactics being used against him were the very ones he'd once employed so effectively. "You've gone soft," Jack's message read, delivered via his lawyers. "The market has no place for conscience." Chloe found him there, still staring at the screens. "I just heard," she said quietly. "Jack called me." Lucas turned, his expression grim. "Let me guess, he wants you to join forces with him. Complete your revenge by helping him tear down everything I've built." Yes, she moved to stand beside him, watching the numbers continue to fall. "He says it's perfect justice, you losing everything the same way my father did." The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice tired but resolved. "Maybe he's right. Maybe this is justice." "Is that what you really believe?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair, studying the empire he'd built crumbling in real time. "I destroyed your father's company because I could, because profit mattered more than people. Now I'm losing everything because I finally learned that lesson. There's a certain poetry to it, don't you think?" Chloe was quiet for a long moment, fingering the rosary beads she now carried with her. "What will happen to the companies you've been trying to help? The families you've been making amends with?" "Jack will strip them for assets, just like I used to do." Lucas laughed bitterly. "The cycle continues. Unless we stop it." Lucas turned to her sharply. "We." Chloe met his gaze steadily. "I've spent months watching you try to change, to make things right. I've seen you work with small business owners, set up support programs, create opportunities instead of destroying them." She gestured to the screens. "Are you going to let all that go without a fight?" "What are you suggesting?" "Fight back. Not the old way, not with destruction and ruthlessness. Fight back by showing there's a better way to do business." The next hours were a blur of activity. Lucas called emergency meetings with his board, while Chloe reached out to the community of small business owners and families they'd been working with. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of business owners came forward with stories of how Marshall Enterprises' new approach had saved their companies, created jobs, strengthened communities. Former employees spoke about the culture change they'd witnessed. Families shared how Lucas's restitution programs had helped them rebuild their lives. The media narrative began to shift. What started as a story about a weakened company became something else, a discussion about the future of business ethics, about responsibility and redemption. "This isn't just about Marshall Enterprises," Chloe told reporters gathered outside their building. "This is about what kind of business world we want to create. One built on destruction and profit at any cost, or one that proves we can succeed while helping others succeed too." Lucas watched her from his office, amazed by her passionate defense of the very company she'd once sworn to destroy. When she joined him later, he had to ask, "Why are you helping me?" "Because my father was right," she replied, holding up his journal. "He believed in your potential to be more than just another corporate raider. He saw the good in you, even at the end. Maybe it's time I honored that faith." The battle for Marshall Enterprises lasted weeks. Jack and his allies fought dirty, using every tactic in the corporate raider's handbook. But Lucas and Chloe fought back with something more powerful, proof that ethical business could be profitable business. They opened their books, showing how helping struggling companies recover had actually strengthened Marshall Enterprises' long-term position. They demonstrated how investing in communities had created sustainable growth and loyal partnerships. The turning point came when employees from every level of the company took voluntary pay cuts to buy shares, standing with Lucas against the takeover attempt. Small business owners pooled resources to purchase stock. Communities rallied around the company that had helped rebuild them. Jack's final attack came in the form of a public letter, revealing the truth about Lucas and Chloe's marriage arrangement, trying to paint their relationship as a sham and their redemption story as a lie. But when reporters surrounded them outside their office, demanding answers, Chloe simply held up her father's journal. Yes, our marriage began as an arrangement, she acknowledged, but sometimes the most profound transformations come from unexpected places. My father understood that. He believed in redemption, in the power of people to change. Looking at what's happening here today, I think he was right. The takeover attempt failed. Marshall Enterprises emerged not weakened, but strengthened, its new ethical approach validated by the very market forces that had once rewarded its ruthlessness. In the aftermath, Lucas and Chloe stood in his office, watching the sun set over the city they'd nearly lost. "Your father would be proud," Lucas said quietly. "Of you, I mean, standing up for what's right, even when it meant helping the person who hurt you." Chloe smiled, touching the rosary beads. "I think he'd be proud of both of us. This is what he meant about grace finding us in unexpected places." The city lights began to twinkle below them, each one representing a life touched by their battle and its outcome. They had fought not just for a company, but for a vision of business that honored Thomas Richardson's legacy, one that built up instead of tearing down, that valued people as much as profit. And in fighting together, they had discovered something neither had expected: a partnership that transcended revenge and redemption, built on a shared commitment to making things right. The second surprise came on a quiet Sunday morning, 2 weeks before their 6-month marriage contract was set to expire. Chloe had been feeling unwell for days, but dismissed it as stress from the recent corporate battle. It wasn't until she fainted during their weekly visit to St. Patrick's Cathedral that the truth became impossible to ignore. The hospital room was sterile and bright as the doctor delivered the news Chloe was pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening, loaded with the weight of their complicated history and the memory of her previous loss. Lucas, who had insisted on staying with her despite her protests, sat frozen in his chair. The last time Chloe had been pregnant, his actions had contributed to her losing the baby. Now, fate had handed them this unexpected twist, a new life created during their arranged marriage of revenge and redemption. Chloe's voice trembled. "I need some time alone." Lucas nodded, understanding completely. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed with a message from Jack, who was now serving time for financial fraud discovered during the takeover attempt. "Congratulations on the pregnancy. Guess this makes your redemption story complete, doesn't it?" The bitterness in Jack's words made Lucas pause. How many people would see this baby as just another chapter in their public narrative of redemption? How many would doubt the authenticity of their transformation? But more importantly, what did this mean for them? Their contract was ending, their agreed-upon separation looming. The carefully constructed boundaries between revenge and reality had already begun to blur, and now this. When he returned to Chloe's room, he found her crying softly, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. "I can't lose another one," she whispered. "I can't go through that again." Lucas approached carefully, kneeling beside her bed. "You won't," he promised. "Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide to do, I'll make sure you and the baby have everything you need." Chloe looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the corporate raider who had destroyed her family, but the man who had fought so hard for redemption. "I'm scared," she admitted. Last time I was the enemy," Lucas finished softly. "This time I'm here, if you'll let me be." The news spread quickly, despite their attempts at privacy. The media painted it as the perfect ending to their redemption story, the formerly ruthless billionaire and his revenge-seeking wife, now expecting a child together. Their transformation from enemies to parents became headlines across the business world. But in private, they grappled with the reality of their situation. The baby wasn't just a symbol of redemption or a headline in a newspaper, it was a real person, innocent of their complicated past, deserving of parents who had moved beyond revenge and regret. Late one night, they found themselves on their balcony, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. Chloe held her father's journal, open to one of his final entries. Love has a way of healing what revenge cannot touch. He knew, she said softly. Somehow he knew that love would find a way. Lucas touched the rosary beads he now carried with him always. What do we do now? Our contract ends in 2 weeks. Maybe, Chloe suggested, her voice barely a whisper. We tear up the contract. Maybe we stop playing roles and start being real. But the implications of her words hung in the air between them. This wasn't about revenge anymore, or redemption, or even their carefully orchestrated public image. This was about choosing to build something new from the ashes of their past. Are you sure? Lucas asked, hardly daring to hope. After everything. Chloe took his hand, placing it over her stomach where their child grew. Grace finds us in unexpected places, she quoted her mother's words. Maybe this is our chance to start again, not as enemies or actors in a revenge plot, but as ourselves. The city continued its nighttime symphony below them, unaware of the profound transformation taking place above. Two people who had begun as bitter enemies, pushed together by revenge and fate, now stood on the precipice of a new beginning, one that neither had planned but both, perhaps, had secretly hoped for. Their carefully constructed game of revenge had evolved into something real, something neither could have predicted. And in that reality lay their greatest challenge and their greatest hope to build a future not defined by their past, but by the love they had found in the most unexpected of places. The transformation of Lucas and Chloe's relationship culminated in a small, intimate ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral, exactly 1 year after their first arranged marriage. This time there were no contracts, no hidden agendas, no revenge plots, just two people who had found love in the ruins of their shared pain. The cathedral, bathed in morning light filtering through stained glass windows, held special meaning for them now. It was where Chloe had revealed her lost pregnancy, where they had first begun to heal, and where they had discovered their unexpected joy of a new child on the way. As Chloe walked down the aisle, her hand resting gently on her growing belly, she carried both her mother's rosary and her father's journal. Lucas waited at the altar, holding Sarah's finally opened letter. These tokens of their past pain had become symbols of their journey toward healing. In my darkest moments, Lucas began his vows, his voice carrying through the sacred space. When I was lost in greed and power, your father saw something in me worth saving. He forgave me before I knew I needed forgiveness. Through you, I've learned what that kind of grace really means. Tears streamed down Chloe's face as she responded. From revenge, I found redemption. From pain, I found healing. Through you, I've learned that love really does heal more than revenge ever could. The priest, who had witnessed their journey through weekly visits to the cathedral, smiled as he blessed their union. Sometimes, he said, God's greatest gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges. After the ceremony, they gathered with a small group of guests in the garden behind the church. Among them were families they had helped through Marshall Enterprises' rehabilitation programs, employees who had stood by them during the takeover attempt, and even some of the business owners Lucas had once targeted, now partners in their new vision of ethical business. The reception was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, Jack, recently released from prison, arriving with a letter of his own. I thought revenge would bring justice, he told them, his voice heavy with regret. But watching your transformation, maybe Thomas was right about grace being stronger than vengeance. Their new beginning extended beyond their personal lives. Marshall Enterprises became a model for ethical business practices, proving that profit and social responsibility could coexist. They established the Richardson Marshall Foundation, dedicated to helping small businesses thrive and supporting families affected by corporate takeovers. In honor of both their lost children, Chloe's unborn daughter Grace, and the child they now expected. They created a support network for families dealing with pregnancy loss and financial hardship. The yellow nursery that had once symbolized Chloe's deepest pain became the inspiration for hope-filled spaces in women's shelters across the city. 6 months later, in the same hospital where they had first learned of their unexpected blessing, Chloe gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas, after her father, and a girl they called Sarah Grace, honoring both their lost loved ones. As Lucas held his daughter for the first time, he whispered, "Your Aunt Sarah once wrote that she hoped I'd remember who I used to be. But thanks to your mother, I've become someone better than I ever was." Chloe, cradling Thomas, added softly, "And your grandfather knew that love would find a way, even through the darkest times." Their story became more than just a tale of redemption. It became a testament to the power of forgiveness, the possibility of change, and the unexpected ways that grace can heal the deepest wounds. The penthouse where their arranged marriage had begun was transformed too. The cold, minimalist space became warm with family photos, children's laughter, and the evidence of lives intertwined. Thomas Richardson's journal held a place of honor beside Sarah's letter and Marie's rosary, reminders of the cost of their journey and the precious nature of their peace. Years passed, and their influence grew beyond business and philanthropy. They became advocates for corporate responsibility, sharing their story as a reminder that profit without purpose leads to destruction, but purpose with profit can build lasting change. Their twins grew up knowing both sides of their parents' story, the pain and the healing, the revenge and the redemption. They learned early that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to rebuild. On Sunday mornings, the family could still be found at St. Patrick's Cathedral, their presence a testament to the enduring power of faith, love, and the possibility of transformation. The twins would often ask to hear the story of how their parents fell in love, and Lucas and Chloe would share it honestly, teaching them that sometimes life's greatest blessings come through its deepest wounds. The business world watched as Marshall Enterprises continued to thrive under their joint leadership, proving that success need not come at the cost of souls. The Richardson Marshall Foundation expanded its reach, helping more families find their way from tragedy to triumph. And in quiet moments when the twins were asleep and the city lights twinkled below their balcony, Lucas and Chloe would stand together, marveling at how a story that began with revenge had transformed into one of love's most powerful testimonies. "Your father was right," Lucas would often say, holding her close. "Love really does heal more than revenge." And Chloe would smile, touching the rosary beads she still carried, "And Mom was right too. Grace finds us in the most unexpected places." Their story became legend in business schools and beyond, not just as a case study in corporate ethics, but as a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, the hardest hearts can soften, and love can grow in the most unlikely soil. And so what began as a bet evolved through revenge and blossomed into love, became something even more precious, a legacy of healing that would touch generations to come. In our deepest pain, we often seek revenge, believing it will heal our wounds. But revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The true path to healing lies not in destroying others, but in finding the courage to forgive, not for their sake, but for our own. Think about those you've lost, those who left too soon, like Thomas Richardson, who died believing in the good in others, even those who destroyed him. Like Sarah, who took her life hoping her brother would remember his humanity. Like the unborn Grace, who never had a chance to experience her mother's love. But also think about the power of transformation. Lucas, a man who built an empire on others' tears, found redemption through love. Chloe, who carried the weight of revenge, discovered that forgiveness could lift the heaviest burdens. Their story teaches us that it's never too late to change, never too late to heal, never too late to love. Remember Marie's words, "Love heals more than revenge." She spoke these words from her deathbed, knowing that her daughter's happiness lay not in vengeance, but in opening her heart to love again. To those carrying the weight of loss, anger, or regret, your pain is valid. Your tears are understood, but don't let them become chains that bind you to bitterness. Like Chloe and Lucas, you too can find healing in the most unexpected places. But sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to forgive when revenge seems sweeter. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is open our hearts again after they've been shattered. And sometimes the most profound healing comes when we let go of who we thought we needed to be and embrace who we can become. Grace finds us in our darkest moments. Love grows in the most barren soil, and hope blooms from the ashes of our deepest pain. Your story isn't over. Your heart isn't beyond repair. And like the morning light streaming through St. Patrick's Cathedral's stained glass windows, beauty can still shine through your broken places. Remember, every tear you shed can water the seeds of tomorrow's joy. Every scar you bear can become a bridge to someone else's healing. And every moment you choose love over hatred, forgiveness over vengeance, you honor not just yourself, but all those who believed in the power of love to transform even the hardest hearts. Your pain matters, your healing matters, and your capacity to love again, despite everything, matters most of all. This is not just their story. It's every story of loss and redemption, of pain and healing, of revenge transformed into love. It's your story too, if you're brave enough to let love write the next chapter. Because in the end, we all have a choice to let our pain define us, or to let it refine us, to seek revenge or to seek healing, to close our hearts or to open them to the possibility that even in our deepest wounds, love can still find its way home. Choose love, choose healing, choose life. For in that choice lies not just your redemption, but the seeds of hope for all who will follow in your footsteps. Dear cherished viewers, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join our community of storytelling. Your likes, shares, and heartfelt comments fuel our passion to create more compelling narratives like this. If you're eager to discover what happens next in Part 2, let us know in the comments below. Your support means everything to us, and together we can continue sharing stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of love's transformative power.